All right, you've started your podcast, or perhaps you're thinking to yourself, I need to boost my downloads. So the first thing that you do is you dig out the old black book and you look at what big name guests you can land on your interview show. But what does the data say about whether or not they actually do anything for your downloads? I'm going to talk about my experience with this, and in particular, some of the data that we see just generally across the board in podcasting from guests and hosts that I've spoken to. This is the Podcast Accelerator, the thrice-weekly show, bringing you straight-talking podcast news, insights, and education. I'm your host, Mark Asquith, that pesky British podcast guy, an all-round podcast geek. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Rebel Base Media, where we make technology products for podcasters and where we work with brands, corporates, organizations, and provide studio time to help brands create their own shows. We, of course, create Captivate.fm, which is the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. So if you're serious about your podcast hosting, analytics, and marketing, if you want a platform that looks like it was designed this year and gives you the tools that you need without tearing you up through the feature set with more pricing, please go and check Captivate out for 7 days totally free at Captivate.fm. Now, what do big name guests do for your podcast? That's where we're going to go in just 1 second. But just a quick little shout out to AWeber. They recently ran their Beyond the Podcast Summit. They're the email marketing company that I trust with all of my information and all of my relationship work with my listeners. And I would advise you to do the same. If you don't have an email list, you're leaving listener relationships and honestly probably revenue on the table. I trust AWeber for all of my needs, and I'd like you to just go and give them a try for 90 days totally free at markasquith.com/AWeber. Right, the interview format is rife in certain niches in podcasting, and done well, we know that it can be a wonderfully engaging format, but wait a second before chasing that big name guest. Will it really do anything for your download numbers? Now, let me just put this into some context for you. What tends to happen? We see this with Captivate and through podcast websites. We work with thousands and thousands of podcasters through those products and, of course, the Podcast Success Academy. And what we tend to find is that there's a very specific kind of launch process that many podcasters who do interviews go through. And that process is this. They'll get some cover art done, which is great. They'll stick the show on Captivate. Sounds good. They'll record at episode 0, which I think is wrong. You should be recording a trailer. I don't think episode 0 has a place anymore. But then what they'll do is they will go ahead and they'll start to try and get the big names on there. Now, let's assume you're in the entrepreneurial niche. You're going to try and get JLD, Pat Flynn. You're going to get Chris Brogan. You're going to get Chris Ducky. You're going to get all those guys that are great content collaboration pieces, but ultimately, what we need to understand is, do they do anything for your downloads? Well, do you know what? The short answer is the evidence, according to the data that I've seen within our hosting platform, Captivate, is no, they do not do anything for the downloads. However, that comes with a caveat. Where we find, there are two things actually, where we find that guests that are kind of big name, who have got a following, they only really have an impact if, number one, they share it with their audience, which they're only likely to do if you talk to them about something that they're not used to talking about. Get them out of their comfort zone. Talk to them about something that no one else is asking them. You will be the one that they share. And the second part of that is that if this big name guest is not a regular on the podcast circuit, then that can really help. So when you're looking at this, when you're thinking to yourself, right, I need a big name set of guests on my show, start to look at people who don't really podcast. Because the thing that you've got to understand is that this is your show, all right? These kind of big name guests, so many of them, especially if they've got a book or a product coming out, they are seeing your show as a marketing tool. They are using you for free PR. They are using your audience. No matter how big or small it is, they're using your audience. And the thing is here, you have to benefit from it. Not just get on the hamster wheel and create some content. You could go and find someone local to you and record them instead and get just as good content. The thing is, putting a checkbox in a little list saying, I've had this big name guest on, doesn't really do anything for your show. Like I said, unless you can get them to really go deep into something they've never talked about so that they will share it with their audience, so that they aren't just using your audience as PR, but so that they are actually giving you an opportunity to use their audience as well. And number two, if you can find a big name guest that isn't necessarily a regular on podcast, now that can be very, very fruitful. Now, the thing that you've got to understand with this is, that because you're a podcaster, you are a brand, you are a PR outlet, you are a media piece, all right? So that gives you leverage, rather than going for the people that are doing the rounds on podcasting. Why not try and approach people who haven't done the rounds on podcasting? Go for that new upstart in the community. Find a startup founder. Go and get someone that's a brand new entrepreneur, or go and get someone that's been, kind of shying away from podcast guesting. Because it is now becoming this thing. There are so many services popping up that will match guests for free with podcast hosts. And the thing to remember with this is you have to be selective. Get off the hamster wheel. Pick and choose your guests. Don't just produce content with guests because you said you're going to do it. I would rather you produced less episodes or did solo episodes and had really high quality hand-picked guests than ones that were fed to you for free from a service or an agency just because they want some free PR. Treat yourself fairly. You are better than this. It's your show. It's your audience. You owe yourself and your audience so much more than just being a PR outlet for someone else, all right? So in my opinion, and the data that I've seen throughout some of the data that I've analysed across our hosting platform, Captivate, it shows that having a big name guest on your show doesn't really do anything. What people want is content, high quality content that is attuned to their needs. If you do that, that's where you're going to find the numbers, all right? Just remember that. And thank you as ever for joining me here on the Podcast Accelerator. It's always a pleasure to come and chat podcasting with you. If you need a hand with anything, just hit me up. Hit me on the old Twitter at Mr. Asquith or Instagram at Mr. Asquith. They're my two main content channels. And if you want to go and try Captivate.fm, which is really generating some insane reviews across the podcasting industry. We're just creating something special here with this podcast hosting, analytics and marketing platform. Go and get in early. Go and get in on the ground floor. Go and check it out for 7 days totally free at Captivate.fm. And until the next time, thank you again so much for joining me. And do not forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.